One more round of applause for Leslie. This is a...
Thank you, thank you.
Writing short stories is tough. It's tough. And you did it. You did it. You've got imaginative prose that jumps from place to place on the globe. You're not afraid to tackle controversial topics, controversial characters, and then, kind of subvert that and flip it on its head. The prose is very nimble. It's clever, but it's not doing too much. It's doing just enough. There's just enough prose style, but then at the same time, we get the narrative that moves forward. I really enjoyed it. And, I think as someone who reads fairly, a lot. So I keep track of the prizes, and when I read something that, in bold letters, winner of the 2020 Mary McCarthy Prize, there's a part of me that's like, yay, good for them. And then there's a part of me, there's like a writer part of me like, all right, let's see why this was chosen. And from like the first sentence, I can see how this, in a pile of submissions, a pile of entries, just for the sheer vibrancy of the prose, just immediately jumps out. And so, of course, we're going to have you read. Of course. And I have a selection picked out right now. Overture. So, if you could read the first, couple of pages, maybe from 68 to 72.
Okay.
And this one it's a tough subject. It deals with domestic abuse, which could be like cliche, but you like face it head on, and then you again subvert the cliche. So without further ado, just.
So can people hear me? Yes. Okay. So I want to invite you to close your eyes, if you'd like, to enter the narrative dream of Overture. So you just aren't distracted and just can go with the voice and the rhythms of the sentences. Thank you so much for that introduction, Sidik.
Yeah.
I am humbled. Overture. Mark and the kids are in the living room as I lift the steak from the broiler and prick it, testing for blood. Mark likes it medium rare. Just home from work, he's doing his carousel pony routine, circling around the couch and bee-boo bopping a zingy calliope tune with 4-year-old Norma on his back in her frilly daffodil dress. He fakes a stumble, then makes a show of saving her from the fall, which cracks up the kids. I laugh too as I set dinner on the table. Mark gives me a wink. Me too, Stevie calls out to Mark. Up goes 10-year-old Stevie. At the kitchen table, Mark's hair is ruffled from the horseplay. Norma and Stevie sit at their places, shiny and breathless. Norma is ours. Stevie, mine, belongs to the heartbreaker who skipped town before he was born. Don't forget my school concerts tomorrow, Stevie says. The concert is the 5th graders' big event before graduation. They've been practicing all year. He knows how much I want to go. You'll do great, I say. I kiss him on the cheek. Are you coming? He dares to ask. Mark interrupts with his own plea for attention. Clinched 3 sales today, he says. This after a string of rejections, knocking on doors. I'm proud of Mark. It isn't easy to sell a product that has no value until the buyer is dead. It's not like selling a spiffy car they can drive away in, something he reminds me every time his commissions tank. I put the extra money down on an Appaloosa stallion, Mark says, pouring cold beer into his glass. Everyone but Norma knows this isn't true. Mark cuts into his meat. He says something about pirate's gold for our nest egg. He chews. Something about the steak. What honey? I ask. The honey, because it comforts him. Mark's jaw beats like a heart. You're not listening to me, he says. I am listening, I say. And in fact, I always listen to him. I can't afford to miss a shift in pitch. The kids stop their bickering. Mark holds up his steak with a fork. Blood drips onto his plate. Too rare, I ask, neutral, like a nurse. Too cooked? The kids' eyes land on me. The curtains are closed. They're always closed. Our small house is on a quiet street of small houses. A cave dug from ancient limestone is what precocious Stevie called it in 3rd grade, his Stone Age year. In the 4th grade, he rattled on about the hard, greedy men of the Bronze Age. Now, a year later, all he talks about is the Iron Age. The weapons are strong, he says, and the people are miserable. I'll cook you another one, I say to Mark, getting up. Mark skids his chair back and grabs my arm. Not in front of the kids, I beg. He escorts me down the narrow hallway to our bedroom. The bed is made. Everything is neat because I have made it neat. Mark's cologne bottles are arranged in bowling pin formation on the dresser. Red dice are stacked in columns in a polished brass bowl. A glossy photo of a younger Mark and his mother, Ramona, is tilted just so in its black velvet frame. I stand still and wait. Mark likes me to wait, calm as if I want it. I concentrate on a spot on the wall where the blue paint's chipped from Mark's boot. I pretend it's the back door to La Scala in Milan. I try to guide my mind into it. Doesn't always work. Mark's pupils jitter and spark. He hesitates, then puts me in a choke with his pale, stubby hands. He's been trying hard not to hit my face. Last summer, a neighbor saw welts. In the dresser mirror, I see him smack the woman I've become. A waif in gray fleece, broken tooth, blonde roots licking into my Maria Callas hair, black as pitch. It's as if the first slap wakes up 100 slaps just waiting in his hand. I don't resist. With each blow, I enter deeper into the chipped spot on the wall until I hear the Opera House audience fussing with their programs. Mark throws my body against the dresser, but I'm not me anymore. I'm the druid high priestess Norma, taking center stage in my long white dress. I stand strong, facing Pollione, the handsome Roman commander of our occupiers, who I secretly love and with whom I've borne 2 children. In my head, I sing a perfect legato like I did in high school. Oh, di qual sei tu vittima. My voice reverberates up to the grand chandelier and into the 6 gold-leaf tears. I hold everything in. Mark wavers. He hates that I don't react. In song, I rage. Pollione has betrayed me. He's fallen in love with my closest friend, the young priestess Aldelgiza. I refuse to weep. The audience erupts. I wake on the bedroom floor. On the other side of the drapes, rain slaps the window. The night presses in. Mark is asleep on our bed. I limp to the bedroom next door. Norma and Stevie are asleep in their clothes. Stevie's flute case leans against the wall by his bed like a weapon he might need to fight off dream demons. The air is cool. I tuck their bedspreads around them, the ones they fought over last year when Mark bought them. Norma, who won the coin flip, got the spread with mitts and bats. Stevie got the hockey pucks. My snared angels. If there is a world out there, it has stopped. Mark stumbles into the hall and ushers me to bed. He's sorry, he croons, his lips on my ear. I treasure his remorse. It's worth more than it costs. Sleep finally comes, but it doesn't last. I hear him get up. Even in the dark, I recognize the shame in the slack curve of his back. He stops at the dresser, opens a drawer, his midnight roulette. Will he reach for the Kleenex or the gun in his lockbox? My body goes numb beneath the comforter. Walk 8 miles a day, said the prison priest after Mark's first arrest. Play hymns on your headset. A therapist said, drive to the foothills and yell, throw 100 stones. Mark did everything he was told. He pitched for his old baseball team on weekends. He joined the men's group. Nothing worked. He says he can handle it himself, but none of us can predict when the spring-loaded trap in his chest will snap down on his heart. He returns to me, a silhouette. Tonight, it's Kleenex. His tears moisten my skin. With his ring finger, he traces my lips. Please don't, I say. I hurt. I don't want to be touched. But Mark knows me like he knows his own body. He touches me in the hidden places where I like to be touched. Soft, the way I like to be touched.
I was definitely in it. Mesmerizing. So to write a story about an abusive man, it's very difficult. If I were writing this story and I workshopped it, they would say, the man you've created is too evil, you know, he's not round enough. But you managed to avoid that. And there are some key choices that you make that make Mark realistic. And I think the first comes at the very beginning of the story, in that he's a good dad. Mm-hmm. He's with his kids, and everything is going great. And then one thing gets him angry, and it's the steak. And this is when he decides to be violent. Another choice you could have made was you could have had the violence happen right there in front of the kids. Mm-hmm. But this man does his partner the courtesy of bringing her away from the kids, mm-hmm. so that the violence is not in front. And I think a third thing that you did that was just quite expert is that she doesn't cry. She's not like the classic battered woman. She says she doesn't weep, and then there's power in that. There's agency in that. So my question to you is, did that just come overnight, or did you just, how long did it take you to get to that part where it's just round in your portrayal of both characters?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm not sure how long it took. The whole collection was written over 7 years.
Wow.
You know, off and on. It's interesting. I just want to acknowledge that it's International Women's Day today. And I was reminded, that something like 1 out of 4 women experience domestic abuse in this country. 1 out of 6 women are raped or have attempted rape. I also have experienced that. So there's a deep, thing coming from me about a woman's body and how it feels to be violated. I think there's some of that is at the root of, also in the experience I had, it was also in a small space, like a very small room with 1 light bulb. And one thing that was really important to me was, I just wondered how to create a claustrophobic feeling. And there was a tension and terror in a story called The Peterson's Kid by William Gass, when I was at Bennington getting my MFA, that really inspired me because he somehow got at this terror. And so I played around with short sentences and the vocabulary. There's way less vocabulary in this story than any of the other stories. You had mentioned vocabulary when you talked to me before. But here it's because she doesn't read. She's gone to high school. She had a kid while she was in high school, and she's in this situation. But she loves opera. Yeah, and that I don't know when that came to me. The mystery of these things coming to you, it's hard to say. But that started in her high school, and she got this part. Then she got pregnant and met him, and she goes to that place, and that is her superpower. In this situation. And the overture, the title, is the name of, is the overture by Bellini of the opera called Norma, which she has named this child after. And yeah, but I also had that experience where, a mentor said, "Oh, in an early phase, he's such a monster," and there was a lot of, don't make him no cliches, an alcoholic or things like that, and he has a wonderful relationship with his mother, and he has a nice relationship with the kids, and yet there's this horror that happens. This woman who's so violated repeatedly.
Yeah, and you balance that between there's just the helplessness and then the power through the music, and just having that balance as the power versus the helplessness. And it's cool to see that evolve and just turn into such a round scene that goes relentless with just the short sentences give it like a relentless pace.
It feels like a kind of punch. Almost like a punch. Yeah. And then another sentence, and then another sentence. Kind of a little bit of an assault in a way. I felt like I had to get inside of her body and really feel how it was to be in that body, and as a mother of 2 children, feel how the children felt knowing what was going on. Wasn't in front of them that time, but they sure know, what's going on. And part of the reason I mentioned those statistics earlier on is because statistics only do so much. I mean, I very much believe in the power of art for people to really understand better all the players in a situation of this kind. On a deep level, maybe a level, primal level that you might not be able to articulate.
Yes, and the story gets to a nice climactic point. And I'm not going to give away the ending, because if you haven't read it, you will, and you will be stunned. And it's hard to get to a meaningful postmodern ending in a short story, and you did it well. Short stories are very tough. I think Leslie and I met at Bread Loaf in Vermont, and for those of you who don't know, Bread Loaf is like, I describe it as like camp for writers. It's just the greatest experience, and you apply to get in, and you get to do workshops with peers, and you get to meet esteemed writers and editors. And the story that you workshopped was the title story, The Man with 8 Pairs of Legs. And I read a very early draft, and I saw the promise in it. And we also had like some things, some suggestions to make it better. And just reading the final version and how you've changed so many things, you've positioned so many things, you've given it like a narrative purpose. You know, I would want you to talk about like, how many drafts did you go through? What was the process to get it from that early draft that I saw at Bread Loaf to the polished, published piece that it is now?
Well, I stopped counting revisions. There are hundreds, probably, of revisions. But I mean, some of them are refinements, so they're not deep revision, a deep revisioning. But that did happen late in the process. But it started, The Man with 8 Pairs of Legs, the first story, was initiated by an image I saw in a TED Talk of these incredible prosthetics, you know, not just functional prosthetics, they were like special prosthetics. That just stuck with me. That was sort of how, and then these characters came to mind, the place came to mind of where it might all occur. Anyway, I wrote the story, and actually I wrote it at Bennington, first draft. So I'm just because you're asking about iterations, I want to give the year. 2012, first draft. 2013, I took it to Tin House, which is also a very esteemed workshop situation at Reed College. And I worked with the wonderful, brilliant teacher, Charles D'Ambrosio. And a lot of people, you know, loved it there. One person in that class became the president of my fan club when I didn't have anything to show for myself. And she's still the president of my fan club. And in fact, she's in LA. She was just with me at Skylight Books in LA. And Charles Ambrosio, when we had our one-on-one, confronted me and asked me if I had the courage to write this story. And I'm like, I was floored. I was like, fuck, I probably do not have the courage to write this story. What is it he sees in the lack in me and the possibility of the story, you know? That was cool. And then he said, get those two people into a room as fast as possible in the story. You know, don't fool around in that first scene too much, just get them into the room. So I did that. Okay. 3 years later, 2016, I had worked on it some in the other stories. That's when I met you, Bread Loaf.
Yeah.
Okay, and then Sidik, who's a teacher, also as well as a writer, high school teacher, and so's Harriet, the main character. I mean, the main character of the book, the protagonist of that story, is a high school teacher, and he said, why don't you get her a little bit more in the classroom? People were telling me where to put my people.
I remember saying
I eventually I did, and there's a very strong scene of her teaching where things kind of come to a head in a lot of ways. Then, worked on it. 3 years later, 2019, I went to Juniper, University of Massachusetts in Amherst. I worked with Joy Williams, wonderful, quirky writer, and was very blown away because I thought, oh, by now it's like finished and Joy, everybody's just gonna love it and Joy's gonna like, yeah. And I really admire her. No, that did not happen. A couple of the students in the group who were like 1/3 my age were like, I think you could lose about these 10 things, which included a couple scenes, 2 or 3 of the characters, you know, and so on. Things I was quite attached to. But I realized that after all that time, I had really worked and overworked that story. There was way too much stuff in it. So I listened, even though I felt humiliated in the moment. And I took those things out, and I refined it. And it was the only story that's in this collection. I'd sent out all the other stories, and 3 or 4 of them, I think, won first prizes. I hadn't sent this one out. And and Ladette Randolph, the chief editor of Plowshares, which was one of the most esteemed literary reviews to me.
Yeah.
She loved it. She said, I want it. I want to publish it. So just saying, I mean, all that time paid off in terms of, it took a long time to really get to know those characters. And I just stuck with it until I felt I had gotten it right. So that's
that
and now it's the title story of my collection.
It does take a while, and I think one thing that resonated with me is when you said, there's some fear involved. Like, are you courageous enough to tell a story about a man with prosthetic limbs who keeps adding a pair, and then also about a woman who is able, but then kind of has an urge to join and like has the urge to maybe get prosthetic limbs herself, and it comes from that courage. It takes a lot. It takes a lot, and that just kind of makes me think about the stories in general and how they just bounce from place to place, country to country. And for a second, I'd like you to just read one that is centered Thailand. And
do you want me to read it?
Yeah, I'll read. I'll read it. And so, this one's Thunder in Illinois, which has the scene that kind of flashes back to Thailand here. Valai slid her hand into his and let him lead her into the busy street. Outside in the dusk, two grinning boys came up for air after a dive from a rickety bridge into the clong, which smelled faintly of petroleum and rotting fish. After a sweltering day of sellers bargaining from their boats, the bittersweet scent of sun-drenched mangoes and durians still lingered. In spare English, Valai explained to Mr. Evans that it was Loy Krathong, the annual Thai full moon celebration in honor of the Mother of Water. You're a lucky man, she said. Hundreds of tiny floating baskets, each one shaped from a banana leaf and lit with a single candle, sailed up and down the clong. Mr. Evans laughed with uncustomary ease, but all at once, Valai stopped talking. The baskets had clustered along the clong's borders, some invisible current pushing them against its walls. They skittered like manic water bugs. One by one, their flames went out. Talk about evoking a place. and coming from me, who I've written a whole slew of stories about people in one building. Like, I was afraid to even go outside of the building into the street. And here you are bouncing to a continent. And then as a reader, I'm like, I'm totally there. I'm totally there. How do you muster up the courage to do that? How do you do that? And is the question. How do you do it?
Well, so one thing is that I'm a restless person. I moved a lot. By the time I was 20, I had gone to I lived in 7 different cities, and I'd gone to 11, I think, different schools by the time I was 20. And so all different parts of the United States, but also Italy, and included Honolulu, different friends, new people, all different kinds of people and cultures. And then my father taught in Bangkok. That helped, because I got to visit him there in Asia and traveled all over Asia. So when I was thinking about all those stories, all the places I've actually been to, except for one, the Man with 8 Pairs of Legs, that town I've never been to or even close. But I did research. I looked up like the newspapers for the year it takes place, 1999. and looked at stuff online, images and things like that. But a lot of places that I'd actually been to. And so all those stories are important to me. Like all these different people have intrigued me that I've been and in my own personal life. So it's never just one. And I don't have a home. Like I don't have just one place that I grew up and I was born there and I lived there and then you can go back and your parents are still there, kind of thing. That I know a lot of people have. I know a lot of people don't have that too.
Yeah.
But so that's part of it. And then you had mentioned before about cultural references and points of reference and history. That's another thing that's really important to me. Is sort of an organically political being, social being. It was important to me that I read stories sometimes where it could happen anywhere, anytime. You don't know, and you don't know where and you don't necessarily even know where you are. And to me, I'm interested in reading in which there's a total intersection between the personal and the political.
Right.
Where the history is there, putting pressure on the conflicts of the people, of the actors, the characters who are in the story, because nothing happens within a vacuum. And those layers are really important to me, just as the settings themselves interact with the stories. Like The Man with 8 Pairs of Legs it's filled with churches, sort of like this supposed good, and it's filled with prisons, more prisons than any place. That's why I was so attracted to that place. Like, this place is awesome. This little place, it has as many churches as prisons.
Wow.
And supposedly the bad. So that's sitting there with all that energy just in the town. And I knew that I don't deal with it super directly, but it's part of that world. And then there's the dramatic, beautiful, ancient Rockies all around that Harriet really loves walking in quietly by herself, and then brings Callahan there. And so that brought up also time and these teenagers that she's teaching and their anxieties. And she brings up about how long it took, because her grandmother taught her, remember that? How long it took, how many millions of years it took to create that Royal Gorge next to Canyon City, which sort of relaxed them a little bit because they could put it in the context of that. So it plays with time, with the place. And then I'm very sensory myself. And when I teach creative writing, I teach a lot about that. I want people to smell the tar at the end of Tasmanians after the woman has cut down all those eucalyptus and feel it like the bitterness in their own throat. I want them to feel like they're inside Harriet's body, feeling that her blood circulating, chugging around in her blood, and the burning inside her skin, or the firing squad under her skin, however she says that, and to smell the rotten fish and the durian in the clongs, and see the little boys diving in, sort of in that filthy river, and the beauty of those candles in that ritual. So all those things create a world, a three-dimensional world, and with time very laid in four-dimensional world, hopefully a fifth-dimensional world, sixth-dimensional world, seventh-dimensional world. Why not? Let's go all for it. Let's go for it. So that the reader can totally inhabit, can really walk in. The idea of me being sort of this authorial witness to these events, I'm watching the movie. No, I do my best to figure out ways to get totally in. So now I'm in there. I'm in there with them. And I'm smelling what they smell, and I'm tasting what they taste, and I'm feeling the textures of what's around them. I'm listening to the sounds of the place.
Yeah, and you're not passing any judgment or it's not overly subjective, but at the same time, like you said, you're just immersing yourself as the writer, and then as a reader, you feel it as well. So place is a theme, and you have this Lit Hub essay that you wrote, and when I read it, I was like, yep, that's how a short story writer feels, where you're like, okay, you start off writing some short stories, you have no idea it's going to be like a book, you're just kind of writing individual stories, And then you get a bunch together, and all of a sudden you have to start thinking about a theme because you have a collection, and you're like, oh, what links these all together? And you talk about this wonderful moment when you've realized what was linking your stories together. And so, I'd like to invite you to talk about that moment where you realized what connected everything.
Yeah. Well, it really was like I was writing, I was new to fiction. I'd gone back to, after quite a long time, mothering and teaching. And I wrote a book, as she said, about motherhood. That was a nonfiction book, but then I was actually mothering and teaching. And I kind of went back and I was a poet. I had been a poet, and I was writing nonfiction. Bulletproof on gun violence, teenage gun violence in San Francisco, and things about blueprints for the public schools, as an advocate for the public schools, because a lot of the middle class and upper class were leaving the public schools. And I remember talking to you somewhat about that back when we met. And so then I went back in my late 50s to get an MFA in fiction. It started then. It started late. So that I like people to, I feel it's a lesson in patience and a lesson in never give up, and it's a lesson in you can start anytime kind of thing. But yeah, I wrote the stories. So I wrote the stories that I wrote at Bennington and my MFA are really these stories. So I stuck with them, and I feel that I made a commitment to them because I really do trust and believe that we always write what we need to write. We sit down and we write what we need to write, whether we want to or not, And so I wrote, these stories came, and I just wanted to stay with them all the time. And then it was later when, Michelle, so I'm just going to read this little section from the essay that I brought here. So I was at Tin House doing a one-on-one consultation at that point, later, and I finally was thinking about, maybe I could make a book. And I was doing little graphs. I said, these two stories have cats. These two have a fire. Oh, fire. Maybe fire will bring them together. Because I didn't have it all in one building. I would envy, people who said they were in one place. Like Stuart Dybek, Chicago stories. He grew up in Chicago. He wrote about Chicago stories. And Michelle looked at me placidly as we sat in the courtyard at Reed College and said, "What about the body?" Oh my God, I thought, she's right. The human body, its physicality and defacement. There is the avid painter with swollen breasts, the ravenous suckling, the leaking milk, her neighbor's arm mottled with sarcoma lesions. The high school teacher so aware of her body, she feels her nerve endings like firing squads beneath her flesh. The beaten mother of two, naked, studying her constellation of scars in the bathroom mirror. 13-year-old girls in bikinis preening on Santa Monica Beach. The wife who maps out her husband's leukemia bruises as if by doing so she can control them, like humans mapping out the stars into identifiable shapes. There are the heroin tracks on the young squatter who attempts to steal the mind of the middle-class father next door. The troubled woman during a heat wave, generational trauma singed into her skin. The double amputee with phantom legs. And so it went, story after story. How was it, I wondered, that I hadn't seen it? The head, the shoulders, the shield and spear, the feet, the physical body literally marked by the past was my Orion. I could see it now, as if there had always been a mythological hunter dressed in animal hides, his shield raised as if to fend off the night sky.
Wow.
So it was like, whoa, I realized that my own body, it was cut into when I was 6 weeks old. They took an organ out, just 6 weeks old, little tiny thing.
Wow.
I was broken in half in a car accident, broke other bones too, but that was pretty major. Been broken and invaded, as I've mentioned, objectified repeatedly. But also my body was a varsity track runner. My body was a modern dancer looking at itself in the mirrors, all the mirrors. Like that's why there's so much bulimia and anorexia in dancers. They're always looking at that. And I gave birth to 2 10-pound babies, natural birth, because I didn't want epidurals. I guess I really trust the body. Can't say I always love my body, but I trust the body to be able to give birth like we always have all these centuries and whatever, billions of years, however long humans have been, not billions of years. But so there's a lot in my own body, and I realized that for whatever reason, I was writing the stories I needed to write, and my body was talking to me the whole time, and I do believe that the intelligence of the body, I believe that we hold memories in our past, behind our neck, on our knees, on our wrists, that we have them there. And one of my stories, City of Angels, came from, and when I was in an improv class, I was just actually doing a movement over and over again, and just vividly, the whole picture came, which is inspired by a particular memory of my own, but it came like that, So I told the body intelligence and the way the body remembers. Your bodies remember, everything that's happened to you.
Wow.
Sorry.
That's profound. It really is. And then it's just like, retroactively, it appears in every single story, like reference to the body. And you mentioned City of Angels, where it's like a collective kind of first person plural we, and it's told through young women coming of age in the 60s.
But they're like 13.
Yeah.
So you can call them girls.
Yeah. And, the description is there. And it also, I think what also is working in that story is just the prose, the nimbleness of the prose. And as I was reading the collection, I kept coming to that. Like, it's nimble. And I was like, how would I even define nimble, Nimble prose. But, the closest I came to was, like, not being afraid to do long sentences and then jump to short sentences, not being afraid to challenge yourself with vocabulary, but then at the same time be concise. And so is that like a style that you're aiming for, or is that just like a natural way that the words and the sentences come out?
Well, so as I mentioned, I started as a poet. Just as a child, I wrote a poem to the ocean when I was 9 and realized that language, I was able to capture some of my awe and the grandeur of the ocean with some words on the page. And that was exciting. And I think I really started to fall in love with language early on. And then I did study poetry. I wrote poetry in high school. I did poetry at university. I had the fortune to work one-on-one with Scott Momaday, who's just a wonderful writer. And then I did my master's at San Francisco State in poetry. And I studied the Italian poets at the Università di Firenze in Florence in grad school. Loved, Umberto Saba, Eugenio Montale, Giuseppe Ungaretti, and so on. And then I love language. I love Italian. I love different languages. So that was all. That was all part of it. And then I think of it as musical scoring, like the punctuation. So I bring the musical scoring of poetry, I feel, into my fiction. With the little 8th notes and 16th notes, with commas, semicolons, pauses, ellipsis. I think of each paragraph as a stanza, which in Italian means room. So it's a room, you enter it and you exit it, la stanza. So I'm working with each one. I record the work and listen to it. I want an orchestration of sound, but also of idea, of image, echoes, thematic echoes. I love the density of the short story. Now everyone said, you have to write a novel or never gonna get a New York publisher. I have to say, fuck them. I love short story. I love its density, and it's like a poem in fiction. You know, it's not a prose poem, but it allows for a lot of those things that I'm talking to you about right now.
Yeah.
It can, if you have that musical ear, if you want that to be so important, and it is important to me.
Yeah, most definitely. The musicality and the rhythm definitely come through. Let's do Q&A. I think we time for some Q&A. So.
If you have a question, you can just go right up to Destiny by the mic in the front, and you can just go right up there and then form a line and ask her some questions.
But while she's waiting for some of that, did you hear the music when we were coming in? Was there music on? Yeah. I just wanted a minute because you had talked about a mixtape. Yeah. But talking about music, right? There's that's a soundtrack for the book. So I found there's a piece of writing in each of. I mean, there's a piece of music connected to each story, and in one where there's not, there's a poem in German by Paul Celan, and in one other one where there's not music. It's the Carthusian monk in the Hermit's Tattoo. I have the Carthusian bells, and then the chants. So each one, and so of course there's overture. The whole overture of Bellini is in that soundtrack. So I just wanted you to know, because they're going to play it again, I think, after the program, and that's what it is. And it gives you a sense of the variety that's also in the book and why it was hard to find to feel how it was going to be unified, but even just with the music, with Diana Ross, Bellini, Chet Baker,
Yes.
And then the Armenian duduk.
Yes. I know. Who says short stories can't have soundtracks?
Yeah, right. It's a new thing. It's a new thing.
Cool.
As folks here are formulating their questions, I'm going to read one from the chat here, which is, if someone hasn't written short stories before, where does one begin? Any workshops or classes or general things that you might recommend?
Well, I found what I teach in my creative writing classes is the art of languaging and training people to know what a poet knows about language as a foundation for all of their writing. And that's where I obviously recommend people start, not just writing stories without any kind of necessary awareness of language beyond it being a communication vehicle. Really as a medium, like clay is to a ceramicist, or the body is to a dancer. So I mean, I'm not teaching that much. I can't say come to my class, but I am doing something. But I think it's important to read poetry, and also to read obviously prose literature as well, and just experience the rhythms, the characters, how you feel about those things, and then other than that, it is great to take a class and work with other people. Along my route, I could not have written these stories without Sidik and all these other people, over time, the different workshops I did every summer, all of that, I had to figure out what to take, what not to, but it always helped everyone. There's no better gift, I find, than someone giving you a close reading of your work.
Oh, that's so true.
So even if sometimes you say you don't really like what they wrote that much, but wow, they give you a close reading, and what they have to say is the most interesting of anyone in the room. It's just a gift when people do that, and just what they have to say is always of value. And ultimately, the MFA really made a difference in my learning curve. So, it's a great goal to work towards.
Yeah, no, I like that answer. It's like a variation of the customer is always right, the reader is always right, or most of the time, right? But yeah, that gift of just having the community of
having there's all these different perspectives on your work.
Yeah.
You're alone. We're alone, like for hours. Hours and hours, all of our lives. And I don't think I tell people no one's alone as much as I am, because I also, I teach, but I teach out of my own home. So anyway.
Yeah. That's cool.
Does anybody have any other comment or question? There's one.
Sure.
Yeah.
You're not going to be able to have useful enough words. How was Harriet's Cutting
related to her contemplating creating fresh stumps in order to join her lover with prostheses, and was being tall and flat-chested enough to drive both.
Right, yeah. Well, that was a little detail that I came up with that she did cut herself at some point, and she did have some scars where, if she were to cut off her leg herself, there was kind of a little line. It was already kind of delineated. She also had them on her arms. She wasn't sure if Caroline ever saw that. That was just during a certain period after, she'd been sort of estranged from her family, and then had run away to her grandmother in this little farmhouse. Then her grandmother had died not that long ago, and she's kind of on her own. And she has this sort of hyper awareness of her body. She just already. And so then she meets him, and there's this whole question of sort of visible and invisible suffering. She says at some point, I can't just replace my suffering with something spectacular, like you can. And remember, they're in the mountain. I think he just takes off his stuff and said, look at these, So I think it was just one small element. I think there were much deeper elements that just led her to envy the way he could have a set of prosthetics that would help him just climb up a mountain with fissures, or be taller if he wanted to be taller, or go into the cold river in the gorge without being cold, and that it would never bruise, and it would never swell, and never varicose veins. It's sort of like,
Yeah, it's interesting in that story how she goes, like, she sleeps with him, and then, like, it goes. The first feeling she gets is, like, a little bit betrayal. Like, oh, wow, I didn't realize that.
Because he was, like, the swaggering guy. Like,
yeah. What? And it goes from, like, whoa, you just duped me, to, like, towards the end, she's like, I want to be like you, like, this is a great transformation.
I want to like you, with you.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, we've got one more question. How do you know when a story is finished?
I want to know that answer. Can you tell me that answer?
Oh, for a dime. Let's see. That is interesting. So, one of my teachers, Jim Shepard, said, it doesn't get easier, but it gets faster. And I'm really hoping that. I'm about halfway through my next collection, tentatively called Free Radicals, exploring questions of freedom and the meaning of freedom. And I hope it does go faster. But on the other hand, it takes time to, I'm a person who's filled with ideas, and I was also have more of a poet sensibility. So it's all language and ideas, and they're like, what about the characters? Okay, let me deal with that. Let me find out what that's about. Or any kind of narrative movement and all these kinds of things. So that takes time to know the characters. And one way that a friend of mine said, you just start sending stuff out, and they reject you, and you're like, oh, okay, I got to make it better. You send it out again, and you get rejected. I got to keep working on it. There's that, and I think we mature in awareness of what our own standards, for ourselves. I want to read something, as fine as what I want to read. I want something that engages my body and my heart and my mind. I want intellectual energy. I want emotional energy, and I want physicality. And so I want to have that. And in the end, I think I already mentioned that I record. So there's that level too of some sort of fine-tuning, is listening to that orchestration that you've been working on, listening to those rhythms and the rhyming of idea, sound, and doing those final listenings. But when I sent it out and Plausher took it, I wasn't sure. I had worked on it so long that I shared with everybody here that history is like, I was like screaming when they called and said, oh my God, God, Plowshares wants my quirky love story.
That's,
Yeah, I really wasn't sure myself. So that's.
oh, wow. Well, that's awesome. Yes, it doesn't get easier. It gets faster.
Yeah.
And we get better with each rejection. And then we end up on stage. And it was a pleasure sharing the stage with you, and listening to your reflection on your work and hearing you read. So,
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you,
All
Sidik.
right.